So we're on 118, preventing difficulties. Okay, so all Buddhist traditions have faced difficulties with teachers who do not behave properly or abuse their status to gain offerings, respect, or sex. So it's not only a problem within the Buddhist community, it's a problem within the communities of most religions and in businesses, and it's human beings, isn't it? You know, the mind of attachment, especially, that creates so many problems. Sometimes we think, oh, it's only the mind of anger that is negative, because we can see anger as some hostility. But attachment isn't so negative, it's just trying to get what we want. Yeah, and so we often don't realize that attachment, too, is one of the afflictions, and that it binds us to samsara in a way that anger doesn't. Yeah. So all the different kinds of attachment are really, they're like they stick us to samsara. This kind of behavior is totally against the Dharma and harms not only other persons involved, but also the teacher and the existence of the Dharma. Some unfortunate situations have occurred in the West and in Taiwan regarding a few teachers in the Tibetan tradition. This has caused great confusion and feelings of hurt and betrayal in students' minds. Many of these problems have arisen because the transmission of Tibetan Buddhism abroad is in its early stages. There is no central organization that affirms people's suitability to teach, so it is possible for unqualified people to go abroad and set up a Dharma center. Some people who would never be in a position to give teachings or initiations in the Tibetan community suddenly become great lamas in other countries. This is admirable if it is someone who remains humble and does not have the opportunity to show their great qualities in the Tibetan community. But if someone is merely taking advantage of being in another place to promote themselves, it is sad. It's worse than sad, I think. Once in another country, these people are separated from the support and watchful eyes of their peers and teachers. So often teachers are asked to come to the West and, from Asia, and they come alone. They have nobody to talk to. Maybe their attendant comes, often not. Nobody to talk to. They learn English. They get to know Westerners. The Westerners don't know the monastic discipline and start asking the lamas to go all sorts of places and do all sorts of things. And, the lama, they're lonely. They want to, go out and do something. And the Westerners, spoil them. I remember one time I was in Kansas and we were driving somewhere, and somebody asked me, because they had a monk there at their center, they asked me if it was okay to invite him to go to a casino. Yeah? I mean, that's how little they knew about monastic discipline. Another place they were telling me that one of the women had very long hair, and and she was just kind of draping it over one of the monk's shoulders. Again, that like no thought, no idea what the monk's discipline is or how they should behave or anything like this. Just being like, Well, wow, some new interesting people, and, you know, especially in America, people are very informal, and so let's just invite them out. Okay? So they're separated from their support and the watchful eyes of their peers and teachers. Yeah, when you're with a community of people who know what your discipline is, you behave because everybody's doing the same thing, and so you join in that. And if you start doing something way off base, and people see it, they're going to say something. Okay, but if you're in another country, surrounded by people who think you're an exotic Tibetan Lama, so you must have high realizations, and they want to take you around and do stuff, then you know it's easy to you don't have that support that holds you in. Isolated and perhaps lonely, they are flattered by the attention and offering showered on them by devotees. You know? And you can see in Taiwan, Southeast Asia, here, especially, if the children who are recognized as incarnations of the previous teacher, these kids are given so many gifts. They're just little kids, you know. But people are saying, well, you create so much merit to make offerings to your teacher. We just read that, didn't we? So, I want to, offer a train set and a Lego set and a this and a that and take them to Disneyland. These are the little ones. The older ones, you take them to the shopping center to get this and that and the other thing. And, so it's this dynamic on one hand of the Tibetans being outside their milieu and so not being able to hold the discipline, and of people in other countries, just infatuated with the idea of a Tibetan Lama who must be a holy being, and then being taught that you create so much good karma. So some of the very, very old lamas, they're totally resistant to this. They're not interested. But the younger ones, yeah, they aren't as drenched in the Dharma, and it can be difficult for them. Okay? So His Holiness says this is no excuse for their poor behavior. Everyone is responsible for their own actions. However, having 2 or 3 Tibetans of the same sex, or Westerners in the case of Western teachers, living at a Dharma center could help prevent temptation. Okay? Especially if a teacher is a lay teacher, then they don't have the precepts, so it's even easier. Because Buddhism is new in the West, students do not know how to evaluate a teacher's qualities and may rush into a guru-disciple relationship without adequate knowledge. Some students see Tibetans as exotic and mysterious, akin to the Western fascination with Shangri-La. Remember that book? What was it called? Lost Horizons, yeah. Finding the land of Shangri-La, So such an attitude is akin to blind faith and is not conducive for establishing a healthy mentor-disciple relationship. Monastics studying at the monastic universities in India have a much more realistic attitude about their teachers. Like I was saying the other day, that just because somebody has the title Rinpoche, the Tibetans don't always go goo goo gaga, over them. And you can really see this kind of exaggeration because people do not treat Western monastics like this. Yeah, it's like, because Tibetans are exotic. Yeah, so because students are new to Buddhism, they may have blind devotion and obedience to spiritual mentors. You know this whole thing, surrender to the guru? So people hear that beforehand. Hearing about the great merit gained from making offerings to spiritual mentors, they may give them many donations and gifts, things that someone living in India would not have. The teacher becomes spoiled by the gifts and esteem of the students, and if he is not careful, this could lead to his taking advantage of well-meaning students. Okay? Because students want to get you things, then everything you want, everything you need, you just mention it and ask somebody, and they get it for you. But that's not right, because not everybody who comes is rich and can afford that stuff. Yeah? So you shouldn't just take people's generosity for granted. And, anytime you need something, say, please get me this, please get me that, even if it's a small thing. You have to really assess people's ability. Otherwise, it's not right at all. I have received, His Holiness says, many letters from people in other countries asking me to do something about this, but it is not within my control. Tibetan Buddhism is not organized like the Catholic Church with a Pope and Vatican administration. I cannot make someone return to India or force him to stop wearing robes. When I teach, I give clear instructions about suitable behavior for teachers, both monastic and lay. If people do not listen to me then, when I'm giving teachings, it is doubtful they will heed instructions from my office or from the Department of Religious and Cultural Affairs. So His Holiness has said this many times. I remember once I was talking with one of the people who worked in the Department of Religious and Cultural Affairs, and I was telling him something that was going on in Taiwan that my friends there had written me about. And, he didn't know about it, and I said, what, can you do something? And he said, what can I do? I have no control over these people. They come from their monasteries, their teacher, maybe their monastery can say something to them, but they're not going to listen to the Department of Religious and Cultural Affairs. Yeah. And then, there's no legal system whereby they can make somebody do something. Yeah. On the other hand, there's, so this is a fault of not having a big structure. On the other hand, there's lots of faults with having a big structure. Okay, you look in Thailand, they have a big monastic structure that is linked to the secular society, and there's a law from 1928 in Thailand saying that the monks cannot ordain bhikshunis, give the full ordination to women. And so the monks, they don't want to do this, but they cite the secular law as the reason for not giving it. Okay? And then they can control who gives ordinations, who doesn't. So it can get really sticky too when there's a very big bureaucracy that looks over everybody, because then you don't have any freedom. And, in our situation, what we're trying to do here, it's not being done in India, giving bhikshuni ordination to the women. So, there was some suggestion some years ago that we form some kind of organization in the West. I was really hesitant because I don't want people in Dharamsala telling us that we can't ordain people. Yeah, because what we're doing is completely legal according to the Vinaya. It's not happening in the Tibetan tradition, but according to Vinaya, what we're doing is fine. Yeah. So I don't want anybody in Dharamsala telling us here in America what we can and can't do. Okay. But anyway, most Dharma centers don't seem very keen to have some big national structure. Although in Germany they have one, and it seems to work quite well in terms of when there were some things happening that were not suitable. The national structure took action, and that was quite good. As Buddhism becomes rooted in other cultures and people understand it better, they will know the criteria for qualified teachers and will examine potential teachers with care. They will enter into guru-disciple relationships with greater understanding and clarity. In addition, more teachers will live and travel abroad, and people will be able to choose among them. Okay. And hopefully there won't be so much glamour. Okay. When looking at damaging situations that have arisen in previous years, I believe both sides have responsibility to prevent such happenings in the future. A spiritual mentor is responsible for his or her behavior. A student is responsible for not going along with any improper behavior on the teacher's part. So education is needed on both sides about what is suitable behavior for monastics, so the monastics and the lay people know that, and the lay people need to know about how to say something and feel empowered to say something if things are not going well. Because this becomes then the difficulty with seeing the guru as Buddha is that if you see some behavior that isn't so good, you're hesitant to say anything, yeah, because the teacher is a very heavy object with which you create karma, okay, and maybe your perception is wrong. You've been told that. There's a whole it's not in this book, but there's a point in this topic saying that you don't trust your own perceptions. Yeah, so you think, my perceptions could be wrong, and it's so negative to point this out. And then other people turn against you when you do this because it totally disrupts what's going on in the Dharma Center. So it takes a great deal of courage to say something. Yeah. And especially some of the women who have been assaulted. Yeah. As we all know from the We Too movement, the Me Too movement in the West, people often turn around and criticize the victim. She was flirting with him, she was seducing him, it's her fault, or she should have known not to be there, she was tempting him, and here he was this holy being, how could he have done it? And it is very difficult to speak about these things, not only with Tibetans, but with Western teachers. At the San Francisco Zen Center many years ago, they had a Western Roshi, I think he was, and somebody wrote a book. It was called The Shoes Outside the Door, because one woman's shoes were often outside the Roshi's door. And, he was not behaving properly and so on. And things really blew up when it came out. So it becomes quite difficult, yeah. Okay, so education is needed on both sides. Until now, no special training is given to people who become spiritual mentors. Their spiritual training is seen as sufficient. So there's no training programs for Tibetans who are going to go abroad to teach, to talk about Western culture and how to do things and what to be. It's just your training in the monastery is seen as sufficient. Compassion and altruism are the very nature of Buddhist practice. If teachers have cultivated these, they will not abuse their influence on others. I hope Tibetan monasteries will speak more directly to their members about the challenges of living in the West and in Taiwan. Lay Tibetan teachers should seek out ways to prepare themselves to teach in different cultures. Okay? Often what happened in one recent case, allegations were made against a teacher, and the monastery defended him. There was no investigation, but the monastery just said, he's a holy being, he didn't do this. Yeah? So it really gets quite complicated. There was one thing I was going to say. So I've realized because of what's happened in the last few years. Oh, now I remember what I was going to tell you. Two things. So one of them is the reason that there's this whole section here is in 1993, there was a meeting of Western Buddhist teachers with His Holiness in 93 and then again in 94. But especially in 93, some of this abuse was really a big topic because there were things coming out in many Buddhist groups in the West. And so His Holiness is very practical and he's very frank. And so he really said a lot of things quite directly. And so a lot of this material in this section of the chapters comes from those discussions with him. Since then, whenever there have been other inappropriate situations of inappropriate behavior, he has made other comments, and so I've incorporated them in here. Okay. Then, in seeing, because what happens, for example, in my situation, is many people call me and they will say, this is going on in our Dharma center. What do I do? And they call me for advice. And, it's not a position I really envy, because I don't want people to lose faith in the Dharma. I don't know the exact situation, exactly what's going on. All I know is what other people tell me, and I cannot make decisions based on rumor. Yeah? When you hear it from enough people, then you assume there must be some truth in it. But, I'm not from these organizations. I don't want to, speak directly to their specific situations. If anything, I try to give general guidelines that can apply to any organization without pointing out a specific one. And I also try to give guidelines about how to deal with the teacher in this situation, but also guidelines on the students on how to think so that they just don't become so angry and so disillusioned that they give up the Dharma. But also not giving advice that makes them, whitewash stuff, because I don't think that's very healthy either. I've also become much more direct, and I'll say it here, especially to the women. If anybody ever propositions you or hints or whatever, I don't care how high a level of a lama is, you are totally free to say no. And you should. Okay? It's not suitable to have this kind of thing going on. There are some lamas who are married. That's fine. They marry, they have a family, they're not monastics. Great. Yeah. But if people stop start propositioning students, and like I was saying, they say, oh, you know, this is a great kindness. You're going to receive special teachings and a special blessing. And then from the side of the woman, I am special. And he thinks I'm great. And now I'm going to have better status in the center because, I'm the Lama's partner. But then very often the Lama has a few partners. Okay. And I had one young woman, she had been in Nepal for some program. She was in her early 20s. And she came to me and she said, one time this Lama, he asked me, I had gone to make offering, and he asked me to come back sometime in the evening. And I didn't feel comfortable going there alone in the evening. So I didn't go. But I have a lot of doubt now. Did I make a mistake? He's a very well-respected Lama. Maybe I should have gone. And I looked at her and I said, you made the correct decision. Don't regret it. Yeah. But the thing is, you're young. You don't know the situation. Somebody's showing interest. You don't know if he's really propositioning you, because he's just saying come in the evening and we can look at this text or whatever. Yeah, and so it's not so clear cut for people. And then the whole thing of being important in the group. So I've become much more direct. In Taiwan, this last spring when we were at the ordination, then they asked me to give just a talk to the monks and nuns, general kind of talk. And I know in Taiwan, people don't talk about this at all, but I've heard stories, so I know it goes on. But I said it. The monks were sitting in front, and I said this, and I said it real strong, to the nuns, and I said, you tell them no, and you go report it. And the monks in the front were nodding their heads in agreement. I thought, good. That's good. Yeah. And I was very glad to be able to say it in front of the monks so that they knew that, nuns are now being warned about this kind of stuff. Okay, now the next session is unusual behavior. So I know all of this is not very pleasant to talk about, but it's good to talk about it frankly and clear the air about it. Because if we can have a good relationship with our spiritual mentors, it is so inspiring and so helpful for our practice, And we really need to find good teachers and have a proper relationship with them, and it benefits our practice tremendously. But we want to know what is suitable behavior, yeah, and what to do in situations where things are not going well. How to think and what to do. Okay, so unusual behavior. I have to say something else. I think organizations are also responsible for the teachers that they send around to teach. I know that it can be very difficult for a big organization to monitor the behavior of all their teachers, but I think what His Holiness is saying here, preparing teachers before going to the West, is, part of the obligation of an organization, both the organization in India and the organization in the West that's doing this, and that I think that if something happened and allegations are made, it's the organization's responsibility to investigate them. Yeah? Okay, unusual behavior. Some past Buddhist siddhas, so siddhas are great meditators, great yogis, have behaved in unconventional ways. They drank alcohol and had consorts. These siddhas were fully realized lay practitioners. Lay, they were not monastic. They were lay practitioners who could discern what was of long-term benefit to self and others, and their actions were in accord with training on the completion stage of highest yoga tantra. Okay? These siddhas could demonstrate miraculous abilities which allayed the public's concerns about their level of realization. For example, and that this was the test, okay? They could cause an apple to fall from a tree at a distance away and then make the apple go up and reattach to the tree. Okay, so these just weren't any top, Tenzin Lobsang and, and Tashi. These were highly realized people who had these powers that came from their realizations, to be able to look across there to one of our apple trees, make the apple fall to the ground, and then make it go up again and reattached. Okay. And Bhikshuni Lakshmi, she was the head of the lineage of the 1,000-armed Chenrezig practice called Nune that we'll be doing here over Thanksgiving. So she's the lineage lama there. And she is said to have cut off her head and then reattached it. Okay. She also did Nune and cured her own leprosy. So again, no ordinary person. In fact, there was one thing going on with one Buddhist teacher. This one was a Westerner, claiming different abilities, had a large following. He was quite charismatic, and and claiming abilities, or maybe not directly claiming them, indirectly hinting them, and so on. And at one point, one of my teachers, I heard, wrote him a letter and said, because he was also involved in having sexual relationships with his students, and it was a mess, and it was a total mess. Anyway, so one of my teachers wrote him and said, if you have miraculous abilities, then, to be able to have a consort because you're actually on the completion stage, and that you're actually qualified to do this kind of practice, then you should be like Bhikshuni Lakshmi and cut off your head and then reattach it. And then we will have faith in your abilities. He didn't do it. But I thought that was an excellent way to put it. It's totally in accord with the teachings. If you're going to say that you're at that level of the path, that you can do this, then show us. Nowadays, there are very few people who are qualified to practice in this way. Okay? So, remember I was saying, when we start out with the fundamental vehicle teachings, then we do the Paramitayana, the Mahayana teachings. On their basis, then we do the Tantra teaching. In Tantra, there's 4 classes. The highest class of Tantra. Okay, so we're getting really up there. In the highest class of Tantra, there's 2 stages of practice. In the highest of those stages, okay, when you are really, really you have complete serenity and insight, and you have control over the subtle body and everything. At that stage of practice, it's possible for people to take a consort because it helps them to dissolve all the winds in the central channel at the heart chakra. It's also possible to drink little bits of alcohol because that also helps the process of dissolving the winds in the central channel and actualizing the extremely subtle mind, and then using the extremely subtle mind to realize emptiness. Okay? So how many people do you think are at that level of practice? Yeah, not so many. Traditionally in Tibet, if somebody was at that practice, if they were a monastic, they disrobed. Yeah, they disrobed, took a consort, got married, kept very low key, and did that practice without making a big deal. Lama Tsongkhapa was at that level, but he did not take a consort because he thought it would be a better example for future generations of people if he remained as a pure monk. And then in the intermediate state between one life and another, at that time also, if you're a highly realized yogi, you can dissolve the winds into the central channel and make the extremely subtle mind manifest. So he decided to attain enlightenment that way, because he thought it would be a better example. So, here we're looking at highly realized beings, okay, what they do. Okay, so His Holiness says, now there are very few people who are qualified to practice in this way. And because of the difference in society, such conduct is harmful to the Dharma. Okay? Nevertheless, some people act in an unconventional manner and proclaim realizations, but do not have any demonstrable exceptional qualities to display in order to confirm their spiritual attainments. Even if they did, I wonder if it would be wise in today's society to show them. The Siddhas of old generally displayed their miraculous powers to small, select groups of people who had the karma to benefit from seeing them. Today, such an event would be flashed around the world by modern telecommunications. Reporters would want to interview the Siddha, and companies would ask them to promote their products. Sign a contract with Nike, and then elevate wearing, Nike shoes. I mean, that would happen. That's the way our society works, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. I doubt such attention would be beneficial to either the Buddha Dharma, the Siddha, or society. Even if our realizations are equal to those of divine beings, our behavior should conform to convention. He says it quite clearly. Okay. So Padmasambhava, who was one of the great yogis who went to Tibet in the 8th century, 9th century, to subdue the hindrances to the spread of the Buddha Dharma there, he said that as we perfect our realization of emptiness, our respect for karma and its effects and for ethical conduct correspondingly increases. Gaining the correct view is not easy. Many misunderstandings about emptiness exist. A prominent one is to claim that since everything is empty, there is no good or bad, and that someone who realizes emptiness is beyond ethical precepts. Some people state this on the basis of faulty reasoning, others because they have had some sort of experience in meditation that is a wrong realization. They then use this as a rationalization to take advantage of others or to justify enjoying sense pleasures. Okay, he says it very clearly. I heard that his holiness also, so this was some years ago, when there were a lot of these things going on, and he talked to a group of the abbots and meditators and lamas and rinpoches, and he said, how come all these people who are claiming to be highly realized and want to do the consort practice always pick the young, beautiful women? Yeah. In the scriptures, it tells stories of Vajrayogini. She very often appears as an old hag. How come they don't choose those women? And then he said, and in the olden times, when people did do that practice and had a qualified consort, because the consort has to have a certain level of realizations too, the consort never shouted out sexual abuse afterwards. Yeah? So if you're doing this practice and the women are claiming sexual abuse, then you're not doing consort practice. You're taking advantage of people. Yeah, I could just imagine His Holiness saying to them and how chagrined some of these people may have been. Okay, this thing of saying, there's no good and there's no bad if you realize emptiness. It's so misunderstood, yeah, and because many Westerners have entered Tantra very early without themselves understanding emptiness and without having a good grounding in the law of karma and its effects, okay, then some of the Westerners start thinking this, when you attain realizations, there's no good, there's no bad, you're beyond ethical conduct, and that's why these great siddhas, these great Chan masters can act in this kind of way. And so I was at one conference once, and there was one nun, and the conference it was a monastic conference. No, it was a Western Buddhist teachers conference. So there are lay and monastic teachers. And so this nun in the middle of something got up and took her zabuton and threw it across the room, and threw another one across the room, and stood up and I want to say something. And later, what it came out, she wasn't making much sense. Later, what it came out is she said, I was presenting crazy wisdom, because we have this crazy, in Tibetan, you hear about crazy wisdom. Yeah. Trungpa, I think, coined the phrase. Yeah. So it's the unusual behavior of highly realized people. So she thought, this is what you do if you practice Tantra. You act in unconventional ways because it's crazy wisdom, and that way you can get people's attention and teach them something. In her situation, there was nothing really for her to teach anybody, and it looked really very silly. But you have people who, again, misunderstand the teachings, don't understand what Tantra is about properly, and then, think, well, yeah, it's all about crazy wisdom. And there's no good, there's no bad, you're beyond ethical conduct. Whereas, and His Holiness, I'm sure will say this, is they say the more refined your understanding of emptiness is, the more you respect the law of karma and its effects, the more your ethical conduct gets refined and gets purified. So it's not that you become beyond it, ethical conduct. You become, completely immersed in it because you understand how karma and its effects, which is a dependent arising, and emptiness are totally compatible. You don't think they're contradictory. Okay. His Holiness continues. Although conventional phenomena do not appear to someone who is in non-dual meditative equipoise on emptiness, that does not mean they are non-existent, that conventional phenomena cease to exist. Conventionalities exist, and the law of cause and effect functions, no matter what our level of realization. If the people who say there is no good and no bad really believe that in their hearts, why do they gravitate towards sense pleasures and self-indulgent behavior? If they really believe there's no good and there's no bad, and there's no pleasure and there's no pain, why they would not discriminate between attractive and unattractive things at all. If they had genuinely realized non-duality, they would eat poor quality food, live in the streets, and help the poor, do relief work in war zones, and serve others who are suffering. All these situations would be the same to them as having luxury. So why do they gravitate towards luxury? And in one of the big scandals that happened recently, this was one of with a quite large Buddhist organization, this was one of the allegations, that he was abusive, the one I told you about before. There was physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual relationships, and living a life of luxury. Yeah. And the students were going, at least some of the students were going, what's going on? The Buddha was always humble, and he is our teacher. He worked hard on the path. He lived simply, mixed with everyone, and practiced continuously. Many people nowadays think they are more privileged than the Buddha and do not need to live and practice as he did. In fact, no one is above the Buddha. We should follow his example. Yeah. And the example of the Buddha, he was a monastic who kept good ethical conduct and lived a simple lifestyle. Everyone is accountable for his or her behavior, and the practice of Tantra is never an excuse for unethical behavior. The sixth session Guru Yoga says, I shall abandon the 4 roots, liquor and unsuitable activities. It says it very explicitly there. The Kalachakra Tantra says that the ideal lay tantric practitioner should follow the monastic discipline, except for wearing robes and participating in monastic ceremonies. That means that an ideal lay practitioner would be celibate and abstain from intoxicants. Although a small amount of alcohol is placed on the altar during some tantric rituals, only a few drops should be consumed after doing the meditation, dissolving it into emptiness and transforming it into pure nectar. Recreational drinking by teachers or students at the Dharma centers is inappropriate and should be abandoned. In our present situation of cyclic existence, we are constantly deceived by the false appearance of objects that seem to exist inherently. Our afflictions arise on the basis of these false appearances. Dharma practice is designed to stop false appearances and stop the grasping at false appearances as being true. What then is the purpose of deliberately cultivating more false appearances through taking intoxicants? Yeah, good question, isn't it? And so, as I told you, Lama Yeshi's response was when we said, but Lama, how about smoking weed and dropping acid and then meditating? And he said, you are already hallucinating, dear. You don't need to take drugs. Yeah? Our ordinary perception is hallucination. Things do not exist the way they appear to our ordinary perception. Although some highly realized yogis and yoginis in the past drank and sometimes took on the appearance of being drunk, they were exceptional practitioners with direct, non-conceptual realization of emptiness. For them, ingesting feces, urine, and alcohol were all the same. However, I do not think most practitioners nowadays would drink urine or eat feces with the same enthusiasm they have when drinking alcohol. He's pretty direct, isn't he? On a very advanced level of highest yoga tantra, the joining of the male and female organs is a technique for making the subtlest mind manifest and using it to realize emptiness. Here, the physical body is used as a mechanical device for furthering insight. Ordinary lust and uncontrolled emission or orgasm are absent. This union is a method for overcoming ordinary desire. It is not free license to indulge in sexual intercourse with everyone. In the past, in Tibet, a practitioner had to demonstrate supernatural powers, such as flying through the sky, to qualify to train in such practice. If the person was a monastic, he or she would disrobe first and then do this practice in a circumspect manner. Tantric precepts govern this practice, and practitioners must adhere to them. Tantra is a higher practice, which implies that a person who takes tantric ethical restraints has sufficient control over his or her body, speech, and mind to keep the Vinaya and Bodhisattva ethical restraints, which are comparatively easier to keep. People who find it difficult to observe the 5 lay precepts are not suitable vessels for tantric practice because they lack the restraint needed to fulfill the tantric precepts and pledges, which are quite strict. Okay, and there's a whole list of qualifications that a consort must have. So it's not just picking up any old person. Mm-hmm.
About this point that you just made about the qualifications of the consort. So if indeed some of these situations were consort practice, wouldn't that woman need to know and be able to recognize herself as a qualified consort?
Right. Yeah, she should know her own qualifications, and the man should also know his qualifications.
And therefore, it should be clear to both of them what's happening and what's going on and why they're doing what they're doing. So it should be a
Exactly.
mutually beneficial practice where both practitioners know what they're doing and how and why.
Right, and they're both skilled in manipulating the winds and the drops in the channels. And so clearly, if they're both qualified, there's never going to be any accusation of sexual abuse. And the woman is never going to feel like she was taken advantage of. It may happen that an unmarried teacher meets an unmarried student. If the relationship develops in a normal way with mutual agreement and respect, and they decide to marry, it is fine. These two people treat each other equally, so there is no difference in power or status when deciding to have sexual relations. The teacher is not on the throne then. It just cracks me up. However, if the teacher is with one student 1 month and another the next, that is not right. Coercing or forcing sexual contact is wrong. Teachers should not manipulate a student into having a sexual relationship by saying that she has the signs of being a dakini, or has great Dharma potential, or that having sex with him is a special blessing. Some people who have been sexually abused by Buddhist teachers give up their faith and respect for the Buddha. This makes me very sad. And it is very sad when people give up their faith in the Dharma because of one person's bad behavior. Some texts make statements such as, "See all actions of your spiritual mentor as perfect, and follow your mentor's instructions exactly with complete devotion." These statements are made in the context of highest yoga tantra and apply to exceptional cases in which both the spiritual mentor and the disciple are highly qualified. For example, Tilopa and his disciple Naropa, Marpa and his disciple Milarepa. If we are not the caliber of Naropa, and our mentor does not have the qualities of Tilopa, these statements can be greatly misleading. Hearing stories of Tilopa's seemingly abusive treatment of Naropa, instructing him to jump off a cliff and so forth, and Marpa instructing Milarepa to build stone buildings and then to tear them down, some people think that following their teacher's instructions includes allowing themselves to be abused. This is not the case at all. Marpa told Milarepa, "Do not treat your students like I treated you, or the way the great Naropa treated me. Such practice should not be continued in the future." This is because it is very rare to find both a teacher and a disciple who have realizations comparable to these great masters. Okay. So we shouldn't get inflated and think that we have these kind of abilities. His Holiness says, "I have had many teachers whom I value greatly, but I cannot accept seeing all their actions as perfect. When I was in my teens, my two regents fought with each other in a power struggle that involved the Tibetan army." Talk about messes, this was a big one. "When I sat on my meditation seat, I felt both teachers were extremely kind, and I had profound respect for them. Their disagreements did not matter. But when I had to deal with the difficulties caused by their dissension, I said to them, 'What you're doing is wrong.' I did not speak out of hatred or disrespect, but because I love the Buddha Dharma, and their actions went against it. I felt no conflict in loyalty by acting in this way. In our practice, we may view the Guru's behavior as that of a Mahasiddha, but in the conventional world, we follow the general Buddhist approach, and if a certain behavior is harmful, we should say so. Okay, so in our private practice, you can see the Guru as a Mahasiddha or a Buddha or whatever, yeah? But when we deal in the conventional world, we have to follow conventionalities in the general Buddhist approach. And if somebody's behavior is harmful, regardless of whether they are a Mahasiddha, with fully qualified, and is doing this with the bodhicitta motivation, still, if that behavior is harmful because the person who's experiencing that behavior is damaged and upset, then something needs to be said. The advice to see all the Guru's actions as perfect is not meant for general practitioners. Because it is open to misunderstanding, it can easily become poison for both mentors and students. Students naively whitewashing a teacher's bad behavior by thinking anything the Guru does must be good gives some teachers a free hand to misbehave. On the teacher's part, poor behavior is tantamount to drinking the hot, molten iron of the hellish states, and it contributes to the degeneration of the Dharma in the world. Only in particular situations and to particular practitioners should it be taught that all the Guru's actions are perfect. Buddhism is based on reasoning and wisdom and must remain so. Because I frequently give Dharma teachings, many people place great faith in me. But for many years, I was also their secular leader. If they saw every action I did as perfect, it would adversely affect the administration. It was important for them to share information and ideas with me, and not simply acquiesce to everything I said out of respect. If you have taken someone as your tantric mentor and discover he is engaged in some questionable behavior, you may stop attending his teachings. Avoid disrespect or antipathy. Anger will only make you miserable. The Kalachakra Tantra advises maintaining a neutral attitude and not pursuing the relationship any further. Keep your distance and cultivate relationships with other teachers, but do not angrily denounce this person. He benefited you in the past, and it is appropriate to acknowledge and appreciate that, even though you do not follow him now. His Holiness is quite clear. Not all Tibetan teachers approach it like His Holiness does. Okay? Many of them have many different opinions. For me personally, I follow this guidance because it makes sense and it's coming from somebody that I respect tremendously. So especially what he says is you don't get angry, you don't get belligerent, you don't say, oh, they ruined me, they ruined my Dharma practice, I'm giving up the Dharma, this person's a jerk, they should be put in prison. You don't do that, You appreciate the kindness that they showed you, and you keep a respectful distance. You don't go to teachings anymore. You don't defend their behavior, but you don't follow it anymore. So that seems to me to be quite reasonable.
There was a safe student who was in an online group through Facebook, and the leader of this group was engaging in some inappropriate behavior, and she decided to leave the group, but she had a dilemma whether she should tell the others about it, and she wrote to us asking what she should do.
Yeah.
And you provided some very good guidance. I thought maybe you could share, because we might feel we have some kind of obligation to warn others,
Yeah.
but we also don't want to be causing conflict or divisive speech.
Yes, that's the difficult thing. I asked Geshe Suna Rinchen about this one time. He gave really excellent advice on different things. And I asked him, if you have a friend who is following the teacher who has a reputation for not being so good, what do you do? And he said it's better not to say anything directly to the student, like this teacher has a reputation for doing X, Y, and Z, and you should stay away from him. But because that's dividing a mentor and a disciple, which is not good to do. But you can, he said, if the person has not already made a mentor-student relationship, then you can tell them what you've heard, what you know. If they've already made that relationship, then you don't want to overtly criticize the mentor. But you can say, I've heard some controversial things about the group, check it out and see, just check things out. Remember the basic Buddhist ethical conduct and practice that way. I've also wondered about this thing of warning other people, because I know myself, if I were in that situation, I would want somebody to warn me. If I were naive and I would not seeing, I would want somebody to warn me. The Tibetans have this thing about you don't interfere in a student-teacher relationship. So then maybe you have to find some way to warn a person without saying anything overtly. Like, really check out this person's behavior quite well, be familiar with the general Buddhist ethical code and follow that in your own practice. And then Geshe Suna Rinchen said, then if your friend encounters problems, when they come to you, then you can give this advice from His Holiness about keeping a respectful distance. You appreciate what that person did for you, but you don't follow anymore, and you keep a respectful distance. I think if somebody's in a group and they're leaving the group, like this person was, I think it's okay. You can say, thank you very much. I'm just deciding to leave the group. There's some, you could say, teachings or some behavior that I don't feel totally comfortable with. Yeah? You don't have to say what it is. You don't have to say who's doing it. But you just say, there's some things happening I don't feel totally comfortable. And then you're out of here. If it's an online group, it's much easier. Yeah.
Actually, these two sentences have me feeling quite uncomfortable. The part where it says it may happen that an unmarried teacher meets an unmarried student, if a relationship develops in a normal way. Well, it's actually against the code of ethics for university professors to have a relationship with a student. They lose their job.
Yeah.
A medical doctor must not have a relationship with a patient.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe if there was something added here that the student-teacher relationship ends,
Yes.
you know, she goes and studies with another person, they have their relationship, so that the rest of the people in the group, it just is
Right.
uncomfortable for me.
Yeah, at the time of this, that's a very good idea. Put it on the list, who's ever making a list for things to change in the volume. At the 1993 conference with His Holiness, there was one Buddhist teacher who was quite famous, who he married his wife, who was his student. Yeah. So that's, I think, one reason why His Holiness said if there's no, and he said when it develops in a normal way, meaning there's no power differential. Yeah. So this was back in '93. Now there's the ethical codes are much more explicit in jobs and colleges and so forth.
But even the teacher-student relation, there's a differential, right?
Oh
there.
yeah, there. So what it should be is that when Charlie says the teacher's not on the throne at that time, is that the woman is not regarding him as her teacher. Yeah, and if a relationship develops in a normal way, this power differential is going to dissolve. If it doesn't dissolve, yeah, then they're in trouble. Okay. But it would be better if they're attracted to each other. Yes, if she goes and studies with somebody else, and yeah, because it can be very disruptive to a group, as you mentioned.
Students, you know this. Everyone knows this. Students in elementary school can sniff out the person who's the brown noser. Everybody knows.
Uh-huh.
Everybody knows. And then there's this disharmonious thing that happens, you know?
Yeah.
And right off the top of my head, I can think of 3 situations where the teacher is Tibetan. I mean, it's not a part of that culture, and especially in the schools where the lineage is passed through the family, for example. So there's, I would think His Holiness is also balancing some situations here. So as Westerners, we have one point of view, and then in the Tibetan culture, there's another thing,
Oh yeah.
a way different other thing. And these things are merging, so it's hard, I think, to draw a hard and fast line like that until maybe things are more clear culturally. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's very difficult. In the case of families where the lineage is that people marry, yeah, they usually introduce them to somebody else from another family where there's a teacher. Okay, so it's not that they're that the people that I know. It's not so much that they're teaching and they meet somebody by teaching that person and then they get married in the Tibetan, for the married lineages. It's the family wants them to marry somebody who's the son or daughter of another lineage holder or something like that. Okay. Also, the Tibetans have a whole different idea about sex. In America or in the West, you love somebody, you value them, you cherish them. It means that you're connected. I mean, this was until the hookup culture. Now this value is not so important in America. The hookup culture is just you hook up and bye. Maybe I recognize you in math class later on, maybe I don't. But it used to be that, it involves affection and it's emotional bonding and there's expectations on both parties. In Tibetan culture, from what I understand, it's much more of a hookup thing. There's no expectation that person loves you. and that you're starting a relationship. Okay? So if the man feels that way, but the woman feels, oh, we're starting a relationship and he cares about me emotionally, then they're operating out of two different cultural paradigms. Okay. That's why it is so much easier being a monastic. You know, if you're a monastic and you keep your precepts, it is so much easier. Okay? So now the section on resolving problems. Just as there are these three types of spiritual mentors and three ways of relating to them, there are three ways of responding if our mentor asks us to do something outside the general framework of the Buddha Dharma. In other words, any action that contradicts the Dharma or reasoning. According to the Vinaya, we should not follow that advice and should express our reason to our teacher. Okay? The teacher asks you to do something that's not unethical, you don't follow it, and you tell the teacher why you're not following it. Respectfully, of course. According to the general Mahayana, if an instruction conforms to the Buddhist path, follow it. Otherwise, do not. According to Vajrayana, and so you're free to say to the teacher, no, I'm sorry, I cannot do that. Explain it. According to Vajrayana, if your guru gives an instruction that does not accord with the Dharma, that is illogical, or that you are incapable of doing, do not follow it. Explain your reasons and discuss the situation with your teacher. This advice comes directly from the Buddha and is found in the scriptures. Tsongkhapa explains. So somebody asked a question. We must practice in accordance with the Guru's words. What if we rely on the Gurus and they lead us to an incorrect path or employ us in activities that are contrary to the three ethical restraints? Three ethical restraints are the fundamental vehicle precepts of Pratimoksha, the Bodhisattva precepts, the Tantra precepts. Okay, should we do what they say? Okay, Tsongkhapa's reply. In this regard, Gunaprabha's Vinaya Sutra says, if the abbot instructs you to do what is not in accord with the teachings, refuse. Also, the Cloud of Jewels Sutra, the Ratnamegha Sutra, says, and this is a Mahayana Sutra, with respect to virtue, act in accord with the Guru's words, but do not act in accord with the Guru's words with respect to non-virtue. Therefore, you must not listen to non-virtuous instructions. Nevertheless, it is improper to take a guru's wrong actions as a reason to misbehave yourself, such as disrespecting or despising your guru. Rather, excuse yourself politely and do not engage in what you are instructed to do. The 50 verses of Relying on a Spiritual Mentor says, if you cannot reasonably do as the guru has instructed, excuse yourself with soothing words. Okay? So what is Holiness is saying and what the scriptures are saying is we must still use our intelligence. We don't just follow anything. We see does it correspond with the general teachings. We check, does it make sense? Is it something beneficial? Can I do it with a virtuous mind, motivation? And if it comes up short, if the instructions come up short, then we don't do it and we respectfully explain why. And we don't need to worry about it. Okay. So I know that some teachers don't explain this and they say, if your teacher says to do it, you do it right away. So some teachers explain that, even to people who aren't qualified to enter Tantra. Okay, but His Holiness does not. And he quotes the scriptures to show why. A story in the Jataka tales tells of Shakyamuni Buddha's previous life as a bodhisattva disciple of a teacher who told his students that stealing was virtuous. Well, the other students nodded in agreement and are prepared to fulfill their teacher's instructions to rob others. The bodhisattva, the Buddha in his previous life, sat quietly. As to explain his silence and lack of enthusiasm, he said that stealing was unethical and contradicted the general conduct explained in the teachings. The teacher who had been testing the students then praised him. Okay. If you think the advice of your teacher is unskillful or unwise, even though it may be ethical, explain your way of thinking and discuss the issue with the teacher. It is appropriate to ask questions in order to clear your doubts. This leads to better communication, fewer misunderstandings, and may increase your respect for your teacher. Okay, so your teacher wants to put the septic system in a place where there is clay, and if you know that's not going to work, then you come and you explain why you don't put a septic system in soil where there's clay. We have to be reasonable. Okay. In 1993, at a conference with Western Buddhist teachers in Dharamsala, Western teachers told me of a few Buddhist spiritual mentors whose behavior regarding finances, sexual relationships, and so on deeply disturbed people and gave the wrong impression of Buddhism. I told them that these quote teachers do not follow the Buddhist teachings. I encourage them to speak frankly with these teachers, and if they do not listen, then they should make their behavior public. Although these teachers do not care about the Buddha's teaching, perhaps they will care about their reputation and change their ways. Some people ask me to speak to these teachers, but that has little effect. If they do not listen when I give teachings, and if they do not respect the Buddha's teachings, they will not listen if I give them personal advice. Okay, so he says, you make it public. Yeah. At the time in this conference, he said you put it in the newspaper. I remember going, what? We're airing our dirty laundry in the newspaper. Yeah. But he stuck with that advice and advised it, continued with it. For the reasons he explains, if somebody is not listening when he teaches, if they don't respect the Buddha and follow the Buddha's teachings, what can His Holiness do? The only thing left is to out the person, basically. And like His Holiness said, maybe he'll be attached to his reputation and he'll stop acting in that way. That's not always what happens. There's often people who come and defend that person. Yeah. So it just gets really very, very complicated. You may wonder what to do if a friend is a student of a teacher whose ethical conduct is questionable. Tantric teachings speak of the destructive karma created by separating a mentor and student, yet you want to prevent your friend from harm. If you see that your friend's relationship with a teacher is definitely harmful, it is suitable to warn him or her, simply stating facts in a non-judgmental manner. So it's going further than what I said. But if that relationship is not harmful, it is best to leave things alone. So you have to see if that person's getting harmed. Yeah. The key to whether you create the negative karma of separating a disciple and teacher lies in the motivation. Actions motivated by an angry, judgmental attitude are to be avoided, whereas those based on compassion and tolerance are encouraged. Sometimes you may even say to your friend, I would, are you open to hearing, you've been attending teachings with this teacher, are you open to hearing concerns I have? Yes, that's a good way to do it. Yeah.
I think you just answered my question. I wanted to ask if someone was at risk of, for example, joining an NKT group, like, does this apply? Are we still able to warn them about it,
Yes.
given what the group does?
Yeah. When I was in New York, someone asked me to give her refuge and precept. She had been following things online and, was attracted to the Abbey. And then she said that she attends an NKT center. And I said, I can't really do that in good faith, to give you refuge and precepts. And then a few days went by, and then she said, can I come and talk to you? So she came, we took a long walk in the park, and she explained to me what attracted her to that center, and I explained to her, I just gave her the information, the factual information, explained His Holiness's view, explained the activities that the center did, how some of the people behaved, and my concerns with that. And then I left it to her to figure it out. Yeah. But we had a very good talk, and she seemed quite appreciative afterwards. When Tibetan teachers ask you, or Western teachers, ask you to raise money or give donations to their monasteries, use your discriminating wisdom. Oh, and by the way, we're building a Buddha hall, so you should all donate. Yes, remember, so we're not so cramped in here. Got it? Okay. In some cases, a legitimate need exists, and the funds will benefit people. In that case, it is good to help support worthwhile projects if you can. But when such funds will be used for other purposes, such as buying unnecessary consumer goods for the teacher's family, or sending them on a holiday, there is no need for you to give. As with most problems, the best approach is to take steps to prevent them. I recommend preparing Tibetan teachers to teach in other countries, establishing support systems so that they are not cut off from their peers while teaching abroad, and ensuring that they have enough time for their own Dharma practice. Also, I suggest educating Westerners on the qualities of good spiritual mentors, the meaning and purpose of the mentor-disciple relationship, and constructive modes of dealing with uncomfortable requests. Of course, both parties need to learn, reflect, and meditate on the Buddha Dharma, and to adhere to the basic Buddhist tenets and guidelines for ethical behavior. When they do so, spiritual mentors and disciples alike benefit, as will many other living beings.
Just a comment, my own personal reaction to all of this. I had a friend in Seattle who worked with a nonprofit that worked with all religions in the U.S. that had different kinds of ethical problems, and she told me that there's no one who is free of these problems. So when I hear this, I just feel so sad for the need to explain so much about Tantric Buddhism, because it shouldn't have ever been public anyway, because all these books are published. It's just kind of a strange situation. You know what I mean? It's like this should have been for a few people who are highly realized, and but you're just kind of
That's the way it
sullies
was
things.
in ancient India, and the way the Buddha said to do it.
Right. But here we are.
Yeah.
And it's just like every profession has people with problems. It's so clear now in the news. So, it's good that we're addressing it directly.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we are.
And for us to make sure we don't cause those problems.